And there we go. Hello, I am Geralyn St. Joseph, and this is Relationship Empowerment. I am an intuitive relationship empowerment coach, and today we're talking about resolving resentment. Resentment is something that seems pretty normal in most of our lives. It happens more often than we would like. And as a coach, where I see it happening most are in families and marriages. So they're the two places where it seems to happen the most. One of the sayings that is very common is that familiarity, I'm not a good speaker today, familiarity breeds resentment. And that's true because the way resentment develops is through time when someone keeps crossing a boundary or we do not set our boundary. So what is resentment specifically? Resentment is a grudge. It is created through dwelling on the negative or dwelling on either a perceived or an actual infringement on our person. And it is said to be a mix of disappointment, disgust, and anger. Resentment is one of those emotions that we feed over time. And it is most often created due to two things. One is not having a clear set of boundaries. And the second is not communicating properly in a timely manner. So what does that mean? When we're in any type of relationship, even if it's just, the mailman or something like that, we have boundaries that we feel. Now, oftentimes we don't express these boundaries, although it's becoming more and more common that we do. To express a boundary would be to let somebody know, I'm really not comfortable with that. I really don't want to do that. I don't trust that necessarily. Is stating how you're feeling and putting your foot down, basically, to say, this is not something that I wish to partake of or I wish to do. When we don't do that and we're like, it's fine, it'll just be this one time, and we do it, and then there's, we don't really feel good about it. We're like, well, and then you start thinking about it and think about, well, they did X, Y, and Z. If you don't say anything to them that X, Y, and Z is not good for you and that you're not willing to do it, then the ball is in your court. That's something that you need to resolve for yourself. So you need to put yourself first and allow yourself to have proper boundaries. The other thing that happens is when you state your boundary, the other person may infringe anyway. At that point, then it's their issue that something is happening to you. You're still not necessarily a victim unless you stay in the situation and then don't put your foot down and say, this is not happening. So if you're allowing something to happen, you are taking on responsibility for whatever that is. Now, I'm not talking about situations where you're trapped in a situation, like if you're living with somebody and you're completely dependent upon them and then they're ignoring your boundaries. I'm talking about situations where you can walk away, like when you're first dating somebody or you get into a friendship with someone and you find that they're always pushing the boundaries. These people are not good for you because they're not respecting you. So resentment is created when there is a lack of perceived respect. If you don't say anything about it, if you never put forth that this is bothering me, that's why we say perceived respect, because the other person may think that that's normal. Like that's just what they do. They don't think anything of it. Whereas you may see it as stepping on your toes. So that's where the second part comes in. It's all about communication. It's about opening your mouth and letting the person know, hey, I did not appreciate that. I'll do it this time, but this is not going to happen again. Like stating what it is that you need and or want, as opposed to just letting it slide. Especially in long-term relationships, if you let it slide once, it's going to slide twice and three times and four times. The more you don't say anything about it, the harder it is to say something about it. And then you're feeling disrespected. So your resentment is growing. And sometimes the other person is absolutely clueless as to what is happening. I see this happening a lot in marriages and close relationships, because the one person is talking to themselves in such a way that they are creating more of an issue than if they just spoke up to the other person and said, hey, I'm really not comfortable with this. I know I let you do it before, but I just want to let you know I'm not comfortable with it and I don't want to do that again, or I don't want that to happen again. Communication is key, and there are good ways to state your boundaries and allow the other person to know that resentment is beginning to build without screaming or yelling or blaming. Playing the blame game is a big reason why resentment tends to linger or gets bigger, because when someone infringes on your boundaries and you don't really push back, like you wait till you're all the way over here and then finally you start pushing back, then this person who is the one who infringed on your boundaries, they're going to feel like they're being like they're the victim because they didn't know and you didn't let them know. And then suddenly it's like 15 things. It's like this big thing. And they were not aware when it was a little thing, when it could have easily been resolved. So when we have resentments, they are built upon misunderstanding more often than not. And no, this is not every single time, but more often than not, that's what it is. It's that you don't speak up. And then after you don't speak up the first time, then you feel like you really can't the second and third and fourth time. And then with which every time it happens, it feels like it gets worse and bigger and bigger and bigger. And then you're telling yourself the story about how this person doesn't respect you and they just expect you to do this, that, and the other thing. And you're getting so angry and you don't express how you're feeling in an appropriate manner until you explode. Or you walk away and the other person has no idea what they did. So good communication helps one to undermine the whole foundation of resentment so that resentment does not grow. That is the key. Don't let it start to begin with, because when you allow it to grow and you feed it, it's going to get heavier and heavier. A really good question that one of our members asked is, how long do you hold on to resentment before you let it go? The best thing to do is not to allow it to grow in the first place. So if you are resentful, you feel yourself starting to get resentful of someone for some reason, you need to examine, did I say anything? Is this on purpose, or does the person not know that this is bothering me? And can I do something about it? Can we just talk about it? And can I get it off my chest that way? But if it's a resentment that has built over time, that maybe you're not in that relationship anymore, maybe you're not around that person anymore because you did hit the breaking point and things went sideways, you broke up or whatnot, then how long is it okay to hold on to it? I would say get rid of it as soon as possible. You don't want to hold on to it at all, because what it is it's weight, it's heaviness, it is negativity that sits on top of you. And what ends up happening is then you become suspicious of other people's motivations. And, that person may not be in your life anymore, but everybody who comes in who has any resemblance whatsoever to that activity, you're going to associate with that. And that's not necessarily fair. The good thing about resentment is that it will teach you to stand up for your boundaries. It will teach you where your boundaries are. So as soon as you start feeling that sensation of being stepped on is the best way I think of to say it. As soon as you start feeling that sensation, you need to look at it. It's a call sign. It's a big yield sign or caution sign saying there's something here. There's something you need to pay attention to. And if we do this from the beginning and we're more conscious in our relationships and the way we deal with others, we can avoid getting into a lot of resentment and getting into very heavy, deep resentments. So resentments come in many different forms. And as I said, they're generally over like longer periods of time of relationships. So you could resent your boss because they talk down to you, and that might not be a situation where you feel comfortable saying, don't talk to me that way. However, if you are working a job where your boss talks down to you all the time, you should speak up probably. There's a lot of jobs out there. If they're so offended by you having boundaries that they blow up and you can't work there anymore, find something better. When you're in a familial relationship, like the type of relationship you can't really leave, such as, you're raising teenagers and they're starting to get real mouthy and they're starting to be real cocky, and they're talking back and all that kind of stuff. They are developing themselves. But as a parent, you may feel belittled or disrespected by them. The thing to do is to acknowledge when that is happening, as it's happening, if you can. And if you can't do it right at that moment, you put a pin in it, and you're afterwards, when things calm down, you go to your teenager, you say, hey, I just want to let you know that it's not okay for you to speak with me like that. You cannot speak to me like that. I am your parent. You need to respect the fact that I'm your parent. And what I do because I love you and I'm trying to protect you. What happens oftentimes especially with teenagers and like preteens, they start to get this edge to their voice. They don't even know when they're doing it. They do it so much, but it's not meant to be disrespectful. And if you point it out to them, they will start to notice it and be more cognizant of it, which is paramount to them being successful. Because if they're more conscious of the way they're sounding and coming across and the way they're being with people, then they can relate to people better. They will have a better time at school. They will have a better time getting a job. I mean, it's so important for us to be cognizant of how we affect others. That being said, there are times where someone may feel resentment or feel disrespected, and there's nothing you could do about it. Not a thing. So if someone feels resentment because you're doing better than them, but they're not doing the work that you're doing, and you say to them, well, this is how I got to where I am. And they're like, well, I've been here just as long as you. I should have this, that, and the other thing. Yeah, but I got my master's degree. I work extra hours and I mentored this person. That's why I was made the boss or whatnot. And the other person doesn't want to work for it. Their resentment is up to them. No amount of talking is going to change it because they want things handed to them. That's a sense of entitlement. Entitlement also will breed resentment because when someone is entitled, they will feel like they're owed things and like everybody is supposed to treat them a certain way, whether or not they have respect for anybody else and whether or not anything else is going on. So when someone is entitled, they're going to create that in their world. And not only are they going to feel resentful of the people around them, but they will also create resentment in the people around them because they do not have a good enough sense of self and a solid sense of values and boundaries. Resolving resentment is about communication. So you need to communicate with the person if possible. It's not always possible. And let them know, at this point is where I'm feeling like you're disrespecting me. And it could be a cultural thing. It could be the way they talk. It could be a colloquialism. Don't assume that you know, because when you assume things, those assumptions are very dangerous and they can lead you completely down the wrong road. You want a conversation, and approach the conversation instead of approaching it with anger and disgust and disappointment. Approach that conversation with curiosity. Hey, I wanted you to know that when you do this, I feel this way. And have a discussion about it. I had a friend who anybody called her sweetheart. Oh my God, it was like the worst thing in the world. It was horrible being around this person, because that is so like, it's a term of endearment. What is wrong with you? But that was a trigger for her because of something in her past. So when somebody would say that to her, in the beginning, she did not recognize that it was her problem, and she would lash out at the person. And then after she became more cognizant, instead of blaming the person, she would say, I know you don't mean anything by it to call me that, but that word really bothers me. Could you choose something else besides sweetheart? My name, hun, whatever else. And it changed the way she worked with people. And because people would get very shocked that they were trying to be kind, and then that was meant with fierceness. So we need to take responsibility for our own emotions and how we're reacting to things. We need to investigate that. And then if we need to speak with the other person, we need to do that. We need to have boundaries that we're very open about our boundaries, and we need to talk about that. So communication, curiosity, all these things can help us to not build up resentment to begin with. In order to resolve it, if you already have it, one of the ways is communication, if you can, with the person. If you can't, maybe try to look at things in a different way. So if you're resentful of a sibling, say, because they're the favorite and you're not the favorite, maybe you need to look at things differently. Maybe you need to look at, well, did they need more than I did? Was I more independent? Did my parents trust me more? Or was I the problem child? Was I really the problem child, And maybe they were being rewarded for good behavior. Maybe my behavior didn't deserve being rewarded. And try to change your perspective, whatever it is. And when you get that shift of perspective and you stop talking to yourself in a negative way and convincing yourself that this is so wrong and you're feeding it with all this negativity, it will dissipate, and then you can let it go. So to resolve it, changing your perspective, stop talking to yourself negatively. If you cannot, speak directly with the person and resolve it that way. Or if you're in a situation where things are going to stay the same and you need to just deal with it. Also having boundaries, very important. And knowing what your boundaries are and knowing when they're crossed and how to draw that line in the sand and defend yourself when your boundaries are being crossed. So those are the top ways to observe that resentment is growing, stop resentment from even starting, and then releasing resentment once it's there. Metaphysically, what we can do is something called pulling cords, where you reset the energy between you and the other person. You don't need to be talking to the person at that time. It could be even someone who has crossed over. Cords are energy ties between us and other people. And they're supposed to be like the infinity sign, where energy is coming and going, and it should be fairly even. Sometimes they get like kinked up and energy gets stuck, or it's all going to one side or the other, and that will cause different feelings. So if we reboot and reset those connections, then we often don't have the same triggers and we can reflect on what's happening more objectively, which is very important when we're talking about emotion, to pull yourself out of it and to look at it objectively. And sometimes we could use our friends for this. Am I being crazy? Or go on Reddit. Am I the a-hole? Those things are awesome because to see other people's points of view of what's happening is very telling. I do offer different types of clearings that can help you with this. I can offer coaching on an individual level because sometimes different circumstances need to be tweaked a little differently. But overall, I feel that most resentment can be resolved. And if it can't be resolved, you need to get out of the situation if possible. This is Geralyn St. Joseph. This was Relationship Empowerment, and I will see you next time. Mahalo.